Trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement started on the 1st of January 2021. This is a significant milestone for Africa's political and economic aspirations. The deal created an enormous single market, uniting about 1.2 billion people across 54 countries with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. The standard expectation will be that trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area on a continent of few islands and many landlocked states would happen mostly by rail, road or plane. In fact, the first goods traded under the African Continental Free Trade Area regime were carried by ship from a Ghanaian cosmetics company to Guinea on 4th January same year. How we can develop the maritime sector for Africa's prosperity and long-term development are some of the sectoral issues that will be on the front burner on Maritime Radar. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area interconnectedness is needed to drive economic growth and development across the continent in the coming years. Africa's maritime industries and actors will be vital in achieving this outcome, as sea transport offers the cheapest and fastest way of moving the largest quantity of goods across long distances. Even for Africa's landlocked countries, trade depends primarily on maritime gateways, as other types of freight are typically more expensive, less efficient, and less reliable due to the generally underdeveloped railway and highway systems on the continent. The first step is reaching a consensus on the needed infrastructure to drive trade. Experts estimate that the African Continental Free Trade Area could boost continental income by up to $450 billion and lift close to 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty. Yet the success and results of the initiative depend entirely on the ability of African states to increase the efficiency, capacity, and safety of their maritime transport systems. African decision makers must also prioritize the expansion and improvement of the continent's maritime transport infrastructure, which struggles to deal with the current level of import and export. Before we get further into today's episode, let's find out the latest in maritime news.
The president of World Maritime University WMU, Dr. Cleopatra Doumbia Henry, paid a courtesy visit to the Nigerian Ports Authority (NPA) and Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency (NIMASA) while in Nigeria. The managing director of NPA, Mohammed Bello Koko, who received Doumbia Henry and her team at the NPA headquarters in Lagos, reiterated the authority's resolve to leverage its relationship with the Global Institute to develop talent. He noted that the NPA has been tapping the knowledge of its employees who are alumni of the WMU in implementing its ongoing efforts at deepening operational efficiency. This is done by getting the alumni to cascade skills and competencies gained to organizational advantage. At NIMASA, the WMU president commended the agency for its policy on inclusiveness and gender equality and applauded a long and mutual beneficial relationship with Nigeria and NIMASA. In particular, she noted that their visit is to further strengthen the ties between all parties while exploring areas of future collaboration. The Director General of NIMASA, Dr. Bashir Jamo, said the continued relationship with WMU was informed by the agency's commitment to professionalism, research and development, as well as striving to attain global best practices in carrying out its responsibilities. The World Maritime University is a Sweden-based postgraduate university founded by the International Maritime Organization. It has the highest number of Nigerian non-government sponsored students. Remi Ogungbemi, coordinator of the Amalgamation of Nigeria, has urged the management of the Lekki Deep Sea Port to ensure a coordinated approach to truck movement at the port to prevent gridlock. According to him, a coordinated approach to trucking will ensure seamless cargo evacuation when commercial operations begin next month. Identifying the poor access roads leading to the port city, he called on the Lagos State government to ensure the roads are expanded and completed quickly to avert traffic challenges similar to the one experienced at Apapa and Tinkan ports. The first of 3 cruise ships that will serve as floating hotels for World Cup fans has arrived in Qatar for the 2022 FIFA World Cup, which runs from November 20 to December 18. The 22-deck cruise ship MSC World Europa docked at Old Doha Port and will be officially inaugurated on November 13. Qatari official Omar Al-Jabbar said that this cruise is its first voyage to Qatar. Considered the largest ship in MSC company line, it was built just for the World Cup. The ship has innovative and environmentally advanced features and can house 6,700 World Cup fans. MCS World Europa, which is 47 meters wide, with 2,626 cabins and 40,000 square meters of public space, is the first of the 3 floating hotels to anchor in the country, with a second scheduled to arrive on November 14.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
This is Maritime Radar. This week's episode is to assess the investment opportunities in Africa's maritime industry. I spoke to Ipeleng Selele, a maritime trade and investment expert and Group CEO, RRS Trade and Investment, on trade and investment opportunities in Africa's maritime sector. Stay with us. You are welcome to Maritime Radar. Let's start this conversation with the potentials in the maritime industry. You will agree with me that the maritime industry is a gold mine, but remains hugely untapped. Why so?
Yes, I agree with you. Maritime is probably because it's an enabler from a trade perspective. I mean, if you recall, if you look at our statistics, more than 90% of our trade, global trade, even in Africa, it is offshore, and it's sea-based. And I think the reason why it's untapped, there's actually lack of understanding and lack of probably understanding the value chain of the sector. So I think we still have to do a little bit of more work in educating key stakeholders, whether it's government, whether it's private sector. And I'll give you very simple examples. I mean, if you look at South Africa being a mining jurisdiction, you'll recall that, as we say it in Maritime, you cannot, don't mine it if you can't ship it. Now, it means there's no shipping without having key commodities. And you'd be surprised that some of the mining owners themselves, they're spending money towards this shipping under transport and logistics, but they don't really have a full understanding of what the maritime value chain entails, but most importantly, the value add that it plays in their business. So I think we need to create a lot of awareness and maybe look at campaigns of how best we can drive the message home.
Do you think we are doing this already?
So we are doing it, but in bits and pieces, a lot more. We definitely can do a lot more. And I'll keep using practical examples. I mean, if you look at what COVID-19 did in terms of disrupting the supply chain, it is only then that people actually realized that without the maritime sector, because remember, for us to receive and export any commodities, we rely on the maritime sector. Now, if you look at what COVID did, where it disrupted this entire the supply chain, in fact, for me, whilst it was a big challenge, it also played a role in creating awareness and educating people, and most importantly, enabling them to appreciate the importance of maritime sector. So we definitely can do more, I believe.
Okay, looking from the eye of an entrepreneur, which I know you are, what are the investment opportunities that you see in the sector?
Thanks for that question, a very important question, and definitely because I'm a typical entrepreneur, I'm a deal maker. I think what the opportunities that probably are very close to my heart, which I think sometimes many business people are not aware of, it is if you look at the port services. I mean, maritime is an interconnectivity. It's about interconnectivity, right? Because you've got landlocked countries, you also have coastal countries. And if you look at the value chain, I'll give you an example with what we do at RRS, where we are exporting commodities. There's also a key role that your rail system does play in that. You've got tracking from logistics perspective. So if I were a business person, you could look into logistics, and it has three legs, the logistics side. You can charter vessels if you have offtake agreements, right? And you are able to move commodities. Two, from a rail perspective, you actually it will depend, country per country, because South Africa will be different from Nigeria or Ghana. But in this case, if you are able to acquire your own rolling stock, to be able to put the commodities that you would have gotten under your offtake agreement, it's also a very good opportunity. Another key opportunity is obviously tracking, because you find that some rail systems, you are unable to actually move the cargo from pit to port. We call it a pit to port solution. Australia is a very good example where you have private sector that is involved in a pit to port solution, meaning that if I've got interest in mining, I can have a share in the system or the functionality of the rail and port. And also I can invest in warehousing for me to be able to stockpile my commodities, depending again as to whether you are focusing on dry bulk commodities or liquid bulk commodities. Because liquid bulk is a different ball game completely, because then that's where you have your gas, your LNG, and there's a lot of safety issues that you need to consider there. So look, there are plenty opportunities, but I think for me, you just have to look at the entire value chain and then decide which aspect actually is close to your heart and why.
You have mentioned a lot of opportunities in the investment, in maritime. So why are people not investing in the maritime? Because we need this investment for the maritime industry to develop and compete.
For me, I think context is very important. Firstly, if we understand the history and background of our different countries, that's where it really all starts. So again, when I look at our history as South Africa, and I'm going to talk about black business in particular, maritime sector has predominantly been a white sector, right? And if you look at, for instance, Greece and many other countries where you find that maybe there was an uncle or an aunt that was involved in running a shipping business, in South Africa is different. And of course, many other countries will also be different. So I think the backbone of this is we have to understand and appreciate our historical background and also the exposure as to, to what extent are you exposed, either from a family perspective or from a professional perspective at business school, because many other professions have been probably much more emphasized than a maritime sector. So I think there are many contributing factors, and one of them, which is a starting point for me, is lack of exposure. And as a result, when you are not exposed to it, or you don't have role models, you have, for instance, Aliko Dangote, who is actually a maritime player, continue to strive to be like that. But you have to start somewhere. So that's one. Two, so that's background. Two, financing. Remember, you have to get funding, but you have to make sure that your business is bankable and it's feasible. So it does take a bit of work, and sometimes you need like project development funding to be able to develop your project to get it to bankability. So again, there is a funding gap or funding, probably a pressing issue that is needed to enable people to invest in the sector. So it's a capital intensive sector, if you ask me, but there are aspects that are not that capital intensive. So there are many contributing factors.
Okay, trade is a key driver to economic growth, and ensuring a viable intra-African trade is one area you're passionate about. Share with us how this has fared in the continent. Intra-African trade.
That is, again, a very important question. We talk about the AfCFTA, right? And I argue and believe that the maritime sector, because to enable that AFCFTA, you need really growth key, big, scalable growth sectors that can enable that AFCFTA, because we're talking about trade here. Now, for me, if I look at maritime and it already carries 95% or more than 90% of our trade, I then don't understand why it's not at the center of it all. I understand and appreciate and respect that we have food security issues that we have to resolve. So agriculture, also very, very important. Health, very, very important. But let me tell you, without maritime, we can pack and go home. Now, again, it goes back to whether our leaders at the helm have got a better understanding and appreciation of the role of this sector. So if I'm carrying more than 90% of our trade, you can imagine how important this was.
Do you think we have a problem of a political will?
We actually don't. We do have political will, because if you look at what the African Union has been doing, they actually have been very supportive, right? I give it to them. Very supportive. You also have a few African countries whose heads of state are literally our champions. So I do believe that we have political will. I just think what probably needs to happen is rather more emphasis. I mean, if you look at Canada as an example, one of my favorite heads of state or Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, you would have a fund that is predominantly dedicated towards women, right? Women in the oceans economy, right? So I think we have to zoom into it and then have resources that can help you accelerate to be able to fast track the progress of maritime. Kenya is also a very, very good example, where you have one of our sisters who is an envoy, where at that time, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, where President Kenyatta appointed an envoy, that being Nancy. And Nancy is the envoy that enables, or rather helps her government to be able to actually unlock opportunities in the maritime sector. So I think if at least we're able to structure our offices, and I'm taking now the highest office, in such a way that you actually have a team that focuses on this. And again, some of the countries actually have maritime as a ministry. I'm not sure if you know that. Yet other countries have Minister of Transport, fair enough, and it means that maritime is lumped under that. As a result, the focus is not necessarily as intense as it should be.
You had mentioned port operation earlier. So looking at the challenges in port operations, how can we achieve productivity and efficiency so that we can compete? We need to compete with other maritime nations or continents.
Again, very important question. Now, to be able to improve efficiency, we have to make sure that we consider a collaborative approach. And a collaborative approach then means public sector and private sector come together to be able to tackle this mammoth task. I think predominantly in some of our countries, you'll find that it is government orientated, but if really truth be told, if you were to put the two together, you have private sector, big companies, you also have, you have entrepreneurs and the government. And if you look at some of the inefficiencies, we have to really dig deeper to say, why are there inefficiencies? Because again, even there are many contributing factors as to why you would actually have issues with the inefficiencies. I mean, for some ports, for instance, you'll find that the equipment is old, or you find that it was never maintained, or you have to acquire more equipment, or you'll find that allocation at the port itself, you probably don't have enough allocation, or you'll find that one of the other building blocks, for an example, a rail system, if it does not function to its maximum capacity, then it means you have blockages and there's generally delays with receiving cargo and getting cargo out. And I also think the other key thing is the skills. You know, in fact, South Africa, we used to send many of our workers abroad, whether it's in Antwerp, right, at some of the key ports. Antwerp, you look at Hamburg, PSA in Singapore. So I think for me, if we could continue to have exchange programs where we expose our maritime specialists to be able to go and gain practical experience, but from a global perspective, and of course, come and ensure that they're in tune with our dynamics in our local markets.
You had mentioned infrastructure. That's part of the port challenges we have. You also mentioned human capacity. Who should handle this? Is it the government? Do they not understand the need to do this, or they don't just have the political will or enough funds to do that? I mean, infrastructure, human capital, development.
Okay, it's going to require both parties again, both private sector and public sector, for a very simple reason. So for instance, from a public sector as an example, remember we've got developmental financial institutions. So our DFIs, in South Africa, for instance, we do have our DFIs who are very efficient and very willing to work with us in the sector and willing to fund bankable projects, right? So private sector, you have to make sure that you don't have high expectations from the funding institutions or the government when your business case is not bankable or it doesn't make sense, right? Because if it's not feasible or if it's not bankable, I mean, it doesn't matter how much government or DFI wants to help you, you have to make sure that it's bankable. So I think, for me, even from a human capital perspective, it's going to take both, because you can have government trying to drive skills development, but you also have private sector that actually have many key, highly skilled individuals that could come and infuse some practical knowledge in the entire course or the modules that they offer, so that we don't then produce young up-and-coming leaders who are purely theoretical, and when you actually throw them into the field, they're unable to perform. So do you see why we go? Where again, you can work with academia, private sector, public sector, but again, entrepreneurs, because I honestly believe we need to also produce more industrialists or entrepreneurs in the sector.
Okay, you are the Vice President, Women in Maritime Africa. How do you think the women have fared, looking at the opportunities therein in the African oceans? How do you think they've fared in the industry?
Thank you for that question for me. You know, as you know, women are very important, right? More than 50% of your population, just like the youth. Youth and women, very, very important segment. Now, from our perspective, we continue to do a lot of work. And I'll give you very simple examples, because remember, if you are a group of women and you are not structured properly to be able to have a collective voice, you can't influence anything, right? So I think what we've done very well at WIMA Africa is firstly being well structured, endorsed and recognized by key bodies in the maritime sector, enable jurisdictions to be aware of our existence and to be aware of our objectives and our constitution and some of the key initiatives that we then pursue. So I have to say it's such a long journey, because I'm actually one of the key players in ensuring that we are where we are today. Since 2012, 2013, and our Angolan partners, Nigerian partners. So it has been a collective effort. And I have to say, it's a long journey. We still have a long way to go, but we are doing well, because in WIMA Africa, we share all the activities that we are doing to, of course, advance, or rather mainstream, women in the maritime economy. And it's actually different. It's on the NGO side, it's on the business side, and we also have women who work for some of the SOEs in our different countries. And we also have women who are in services, like top maritime lawyers who are part of us, top marine engineers, right? We have captains that are actually the ones who are in the shipping space.
We need a collaborative approach to achieve an efficient and productive port system. Those are the words of Ipeleng Selele. She is a maritime trade and investment expert. Many thanks.
Globally, only 15% of women are directly involved in the blue economy. Existing power structures combined with financial and social capital constraints are factors that often limit women's ability to function effectively. As a result, many women working in this sector have limited access to natural resources, credit, technology, training, mobility, and bargaining power. They also face discrimination in rights to land or fishing grounds. The inequality of access to resources greatly undermines women's productivity and results in substantial loss in areas like fisheries. This often leads to negative implications for food security and nutrition. In most African countries, women face cultural biases that exclude them from actual fishing activities and are mostly involved in the processing of the fish. This makes them dependent on fishermen and middlemen, which exposes them to exploitation, unfair market competition, and limited access to fishing resources. Women play a key role in the fisheries and aquaculture value chain, yet their contribution is often overlooked or undervalued. There is a definite need for explicit recognition of what constrains women's contributions to the development of aquaculture in Africa. This requires better documentation and evidence of their participation. There is also need to pay particular attention to involving and evaluating their existing activities for further development. It is imperative to note that investing in fishery activities targeting women and youths can result in better resource management, creation of equal opportunities to decent work, improved livelihood and diet, including reduction of poverty at household level. The impact of climate change on water bodies exacerbates levels of poverty as time spent in search of water accounts for billions in lost economic opportunities. With many rivers drying up, women are most affected because in a majority of African households, they are often responsible for collecting water, increasing the care work burden and leading to less productivity. Preservation and restoration of water towers is critical in ensuring sustainability of rivers and other water bodies. While women form about 50% of the global population, only about 1% are in the seafaring industry. To promote equity, economic growth, responsible production and consumption, social inclusion and the preservation or improvement of livelihoods are important, while ensuring environmental sustainability of water bodies. Investing in activities targeting women and youth can result in better resource management and reduction of poverty at household level. There remains a propensity to overlook women in aquaculture production, even though women are recognized to be the main food crop producers in Africa. The need is to involve more women in the development process, not only in planning and administration, but particularly in extension where direct communication is necessary. To harness Africa's potential in the fishing industry, investment in the sector, including improved infrastructure such as cold storage units, access to markets and financing, or provision of enterprise support for small-scale fishers and preservation of aquatic environment, will help increase efficiency and guarantee sustainability of the sector.
And this is where we draw the curtain on this week's edition. Every week, join us on Maritime Radar as we explore how Africa can unlock the latent potential of its maritime industry and its connected sector. You can also expect the latest in maritime news and industry insights right here. I'm Nneoma Obi-Asualo. Many thanks for watching.